The Curse in the Colophon, Chapter 2. As a matter of fact, I was going abroad that summer anyway, having received a grant from the Council of Learned Societies for the purpose, and could easily work St. Gall into my itinerary. I went Canadian Pacific, and one afternoon late in June saw the buildings of Quebec disappear behind me, and found myself slipping down the St. Lawrence toward the Gulf. It was early for the St. Lawrence crossing, and the fog kept us off the decks for a day or two, but after that the life of the ship livened up considerably. The most surprising lot of people suddenly emerged, as though a new passenger list had been taken on in the night, and it took possession of the ship, and the usual games, dances, and concerts ensued. Matters were considerably brightened up for me by the discovery of a young friend of mine among the ship's company, not wholly to my surprise. I had, in fact, had a slight inkling that she might be traveling by that line, and indeed some mention had been made of this particular boat, but we both professed the most well-bred surprise, not unmixed with satisfaction, at finding each other on the Empress of Iceland. "Fancy finding you on this boat," began Letitia excitedly, as we hove into the sheltered nook on the afterdeck, and I muttered something about supposing she had caught an earlier sailing. "I didn't suppose there was a person I knew on this boat," she went on mendaciously, and continued with some balderdash to the effect that she had expected to go in for a period of complete social hibernation on this voyage, and after the exhausting gaieties of a winter in California. "I suppose you are fed up with those Lower California youths," I retorted neatly. "Not Lower California, Southern California." Tish was positively horrified at my geography. "Well, what's the difference?" said I snappishly. "Anyway, there they are, and here we are. Suppose we get to the deck steward fellow to mark out the shuffleboard and try to forget them for a few minutes." We managed to find a shuffleboard layout that greed and cunning of our fellow passengers had not already monopolized, and made such progress in that sport that when the inevitable tournament came on, we were able to win it handily. In fact, we showed or placed in most of the deck competitions, and when Letitia won the women's prize in the fancy dress party and was seriously considered for heroine in the Seamen's Fund benefit play to appear opposite the inevitable hero, the ship's doctor, I felt that California had done her little if any harm. I made a strong bid for a place on the benefit program with my cowboy song, "Bury Me Not in the Lone Prairie," but the doctor fellow beat me to it with his emotional rendition of 4:30 in the morning, the hour at which, it seems, the poor cowboys have to get up. The managers of the benefit, so the doctor said, felt that we mustn't have too much pathos. I was rather inclined to remain away from the benefit, but when I learned that Tish and the next best-looking girl on the boat had been asked to take the collection for the lost seaman, or whoever it is, my better nature asserted itself, and I went. She was looking so extraordinarily well and seemed so completely oblivious of Lower California, or wherever it was, that I almost put $5 into her plate when she carelessly waved it before me. But I remembered just in time that I was really only the almoner of the Council of Learned Societies, and relinquished a 2 instead. In the midst of all this levity, we had time for some rather confidential talks on the deserted decks after the indefatigable deck walkers had ceased their meaningless lockstep and gone to rest. Reading between the lines, I seemed to see that Letitia had not as yet taken a life interest in California or any of its younger residents. "But it's really wonderful, Chris," she exclaimed enthusiastically. "Such an outdoor country. You'd love it. I know." But she went on at some length, it seemed to me, to tell the remarkable people that she had met there, its incredible trees, fruits, and flowers, and finally of its institutions, literary and scientific, which it appeared were almost beyond compare. When she slackened up, chiefly for want of breath, I put in my oar, and with some encouragement from Tish, steered the conversation around to my own affairs, the purpose of my trip abroad, the thing I hoped to accomplish with my grant, and, incidentally, my notion of visiting St. Gall and examining the mysterious manuscript to see with my own eyes what was written below. This had the unfortunate effect of reminding Tish of California. "Oh," she exclaimed with rapture, "speaking of manuscripts, do you know what they found out at the Huntington Library about reading erased writing in manuscripts? What do you call them? Palimpsests? There's a special kind of light that they can be read by. They've worked it all out there. You can just shut out all the other light and turn on this ultraviolet one, and presto, the underwriting comes out as clear as day. They say it's positively spooky, like magic the way it works." "Really?" said I, a trifle dubiously. Sounds too good to be true. Still, they are smart fellows there, and that's a fact, I added generously, and resumed my forecast of hopes and plans on which I continued to expatiate until Letitia's manifest fatigue warned me that we must adjourn till another day. After bidding her good night, I spent some time in reflection upon Letitia and her affairs. Her attachment to California, I was more and more convinced, was impersonal and objective, a fact which, considering its unimportance, seemed to give me a surprising amount of satisfaction, and I presently retired to my humble berth on E-deck in a mood closely approaching elation. But of course, a summer's evening on a deserted deck with a very delightful girl is bound to have that effect on a man, or so I thought as I turned in. Before we came to anchor off Cherbourg, and the inconsequential lighter took off the passengers for France, I had informed myself about Letitia's itinerary and involuntarily compared it with my own. She had discovered that ancient manuscripts, especially Greek ones, are a perfect mine of medieval art, and though she had not yet learned to read them, she was enthusiastic over the beauty of their painted miniatures. She had even made a considerable beginning of that study and fully intended looking up some of the most richly miniatured ones in the course of her European wanderings. This information recalled to my mind my intention to visit St. Gall, and I asked her whether there was any interest in hers of going there. She hesitated an instant and then said, no, nothing that she knew of in the manuscript line. I will not say that before we parted at Cherbourg there did not flit across my mind the thoughts of altering my plans to bring them in some slight degree into line with Letitia's, so that we might be able, at intervals at least, to compare notes upon our impressions of modern Europe, and especially upon ancient manuscripts. But to such thoughts I gave no encouragement. I was, or considered myself, the representative of the Council of Learned Societies. I was spending their money, and was, in a certain sense, responsible to them. Still, it did not so much matter to them in what order I visited the scenes of my research, and I felt that if it happened that our travel routes sometimes coincided, I, for my part, would not shrink from contact. In fact, where my research would not be impaired by the alteration, I was ready to adjust my plans so as even to bring this about. It became clear to me that an occasional encounter with Tish might in some cases throw light upon my own undertakings, besides giving me that social cheer and stimulus without which one so easily sinks into mere recluse. This I now felt more than ever resolved to avoid. When, therefore, I left the ship in the usual rain at Cherbourg, and adventured myself upon the precarious tender which carries passengers ashore, I did not feel that I was exactly parting from Letitia forever. In fact, we had pretty definite plans for an early reunion in Paris. So I looked back upon the receding Empress and the friendly face of my bathrobed fellow passengers peering from their portholes, for the hour was early, with keen regret indeed for the voyage that was past, and yet with some degree of anticipation that what had made it most enjoyable was perhaps not entirely ended.